Welcome back, everybody. It is Wednesday, and it is the day that we bring to you all of our knowledge that we have behind the scenes here at Air Domo. And this week, we're going to be talking about how wealthy buyers think about risk versus opportunity. I am Stephanie Gillison. I am here with my favorite partner in crime, Hannah Maverick, and we're going to dive deep into how all this works and how the wealthy buyers do analyze this, but also too how you may not fall into that wealthy category, but we're going to get you into that wealthy category too, right?
Exactly. It's all about prep. Thank you, Stephanie. I honestly really love this topic because it changes how people approach buying abroad, right? So most buyers think that wealthy investors are fearless always, but that's not necessarily true. They're actually very risk aware, and you know that since you work closely with them every single day. So the difference is that they understand which risk matters, which doesn't, and how to balance that opportunity with protection. Now, we'll talk about that today. We'll unpack the mindset so that buyers can start making decisions with clarity instead of all that hesitation that doesn't get us anywhere. So let's start here. Why do most buyers misunderstand that risk when they're buying abroad?
Well, again, the you mentioned this word a second ago, mindset, right? The buyers that move confidently, it's not about the money. It is about that mindset. And so when you're talking about making these, different risks and so forth, they're not confusing uncertainty with danger, right? So wealthy buyers, they understand that uncertainty is normal. You've got to take some risk, especially in the global markets. What they're assessing is downside exposure. Okay. Most buyers are going to focus on the emotional risk. What if I choose the wrong country? What if prices drop? What if the regulation changes, right? They're going to be negative. Okay. But what they're not looking at is the fact that legal ownership, long-term demand drivers, market liquidity, currency exposure, and exit strategy. All right. Wealthy buyers, they don't eliminate the risk, but they price it, they manage it, and they plan for it. And that's why they're in the wealthy category. Make sense?
Totally. And I think that mindset shift alone changes how those decisions feel, which is more calm, less reactive, right? So let's talk about this. How wealthy buyers define opportunity differently. What do you think?
Well, you can't chase the perfect deal because guess what? There is no perfect deal. There's never going to be, the opportunity where the upside outweighs the downside. Okay. The opportunity means entering before a market matures, buying in areas with strong fundamentals, not hype, securing lifestyle and financial value, gaining optionality, residency, income, mobility, right? If the property doesn't perform perfectly, are you still going to be okay? Those are the questions that you have to ask yourself. And those are the things that you need to assess. Because if the answer is yes, if you're still going to be okay, if the property doesn't perform to exactly what your standards are, then it's usually a good opportunity. And that's the big difference when you're buying globally, right? If you're buying to net a certain amount of money, it's the wrong purchase.
And that's such a powerful filter, right? It actually removes the unrealistic expectations that some buyers have, which is perfect. Okay, so let's talk about what does risk mitigation actually look like for wealthy buyers when we're talking about purchases abroad.
Well, they mitigate the risk in layers, okay? For example, they diversify across countries and currencies. We talked about this a few webinars ago, so you should go back on our YouTube and take a look at that because we talked about how you can diversify across many different countries to gain and build your wealth, okay? They choose markets with multiple demand drivers. For example, tourism, locals, expats, right? So maybe they'll have all of those, or maybe some will just have one or two of those. Okay. They prioritize legal clarity over speed. They buy properties that appeal to more than just one buyer type. And that's important too, because you want this to appeal to maybe both middle age, and old, or maybe people who love the outdoors and people that want to put their feet in the sand, or people that want to hike, or whatever that case might be. It could be where you could ski in the winter and go to the beach in the summertime. You want to take all of those opportunities and take a look at those to see how you can diversify. These will also avoid all or nothing bets as well. Instead of putting
Mhm.
into one big win, they are spreading their exposure intelligently. And that's what they're doing. They're not looking for that one perfect property where they're going to get everything rolled into one, because that's not going to happen.
And that's why they sleep well at night. I mean, the expensive mattress helps too, right? Um, exactly. Let's talk about the hidden risk of doing nothing. This is my favorite part, and it's important. What about the risk of not acting?
Well, the risk most buyers completely ignore, right? Waiting feels safe, but it's not neutral. The risk of inactions include rising prices, right? If you wait too long, prices are going to go up. The loss of rental income if you wait too long, currency depreciation, missed residency windows. Things are always changing in these countries, right? They may offer residency in this window, but if you wait too long, maybe they're going to close it down because they've done enough. Okay.
Mhm.
And then reduced choices markets mature. Wealthy buyers understand that timing matters and that perfect certainty never comes, and you have to be willing to accept that. They act when the fundamentals make sense and not when the fear disappears. So you've got to, I tell people this all the time. I've jumped off of a ton of cliffs and I can still walk to tell the tale, right? I've never broken a leg. And that's kind of what you have to do when you're buying globally. You don't want to get reckless, but you can't wait for the perfect things to all fall in line, because that's never going to happen.
Yeah, that reframes the waiting in a really honest way, which I can appreciate. Now, for this next part, we've had a webinar on this, and whoever wants to hear more about it in depth, you can look at our library. But how do wealthy buyers balance emotional desire with financial logic?
Well, they acknowledge emotion, but they don't let it drive the decision. You can't make smart investments if emotion is winning. Okay. So you've got to ask, would I still buy this if I didn't love the view? Does this work financially, even if I don't use it that much? Is
Hmm.
this lifestyle decision or an investment, or is it a blend? And am I honest about that? Right. So when emotion and logic align, that's amazing. It's great. When they don't, logic wins, or you've got to walk away. And so that's what you have to ask yourself. You've got to truly sit down and make a list of what is important. And if you have a partner in this, you've got to have those also align. Whether it's a spouse or a business partner, those all have to align.
Yeah, and walking away in that case is a strength always and not a failure. So that's something definitely to think about. Now, evaluating the emerging markets, and this is something we talk about a lot with our clients. When wealthy buyers look at the emerging markets, how do they assess that risk?
Well, they don't ask, is this risky? They ask, what kind of risk is this? Right? That's the difference.
Mhm.
Is this risky? Of course, everything is risky. Everything's going to have risk. Everything. Walking out your front door comes with a risk. They're going to ask, what kind of risk is this? They're going to break it into legal risk, market risk, liquidity risk, and then political or regulatory risk.
Mhm.
Then they're going to decide which risk they're willing to work with. What are they comfortable with? And then which risks are just flat out deal breakers. And then emerging markets often carry perceived risk, but sometimes it's actual risk and not as much overheated markets. And, so all of these come into play, but it goes back to that list of what is truly important. What is the ultimate goal here? And that's why you have to sit down and truly think about it. We get reached out to quite often, and I had a call earlier today where they're just loving what these properties look like online. And I said, well, what is your purpose? What is your purpose for looking in Turks and Caicos? Well, I
Mhm.
like it. Well, what do you like about, you got to sit down and really
Yeah.
think about what it is. I like a lot of things, right? But let's get a whole list of why, what, and how, and what that's going to do for us. And again, that's what Airdomo is here to do, and that's what we help you do throughout the process.
So the best part of this all, let's talk about it. And I know that people are usually very drawn to this part of the webinar when we have these topics, and it's your framework. So if you had to summarize the framework wealthy buyers use, what does that look like?
Well, we got to define your goal clearly. What is the goal? You want to have a house on the beach? Is that the goal? Identify the downside scenarios, measure worst case impacts, compare upside potentials, decide if balance makes sense. If the downside is manageable and the upside is meaningful, then they move forward. Confidence comes from preparation, not certainty. So going back to making that list and walking through that process and understanding what the goals are, when I started to look globally, I knew exactly what it was. I wanted to own a property where
Mhm.
income allowed for me to utilize it, and where income not paid for it, but took majority care of it, if that makes sense, right? That was
Yes.
big. And so we're looking for a property that short-term rental income is high.
Mhm.
Is somebody at your
Understood.
door?
Might be. I have no idea. All I can hear is you.
I heard the doorbell ring.
Could be. Awesome. So that's a great framework that buyers can reuse. Now, not all of us are wealthy buyers right now. Some of us are on our way to be. How can everyday buyers start thinking this way?
Well, ask better questions, right? You can't say, is this safe? I mean, that's the number one thing everybody asks me, and don't ask me that because I'm not going to say nothing's safe. I mean, you have to ask, what is the real downside here? What happens if it underperforms? Do I have flexibility? Am I buying fear or strategy? And most of those questions you're asking yourself, right? Surround yourself with advisors who don't sell the hype, right? We're actually helping you think clearly. And that's where the confidence is going to come from. And, sometimes you're not ready, right? Sometimes you're not ready to jump all in, but we will help you through that process so that when you are ready, we get you prepared for it. And we make those right decisions together. You know, the one thing that we're not going to allow for anyone to do is make an emotional decision, because when you need to sell that property, or if you needed money out of that property, you're going to come back to us to say, Airdomo, please sell my property. Well, we need to be able to sell that property for you. So we're going to protect you through that whole entire process.
Exactly. Always with clarity and not pressure. But this was amazing. I think this conversation is so important for so many people, regardless of what phase of buying they're in, because that mindset really does shape the outcomes. So, for everyone watching, if you are navigating uncertainty and comparing the markets or feeling stuck between caution and opportunity, we're definitely here to help. You can think it through clearly. So reach out for guidance, but definitely do explore the vetted global opportunities on airdomo.com. Stephanie, thank you so much again. This was amazing. And for everyone who joined, thank you. And we'll see you in the next session.
Bye, everyone.